I have kept a fire my whole life, and until the winter I am going to tell you about, I never once thought there was anything strange in it. You keep a fire because the cold will kill you if you don't. That is the whole of the reason a man in cold kettle needs. The valley sits high and narrow between two shoulders of gray rock, and the wind comes down it in the dark months like something with an errand, and if your fire goes out the cold walks in behind it and sits down at your table and does not leave. So you feed the fire. You bank it at night so a coal survives till morning. You do not let it die. My father taught me that with his hands on mine when I was small enough to stand on the hearthstone, and his father taught him, and back, further than any of us could name, to a time before the church down in the low town had a roof, before the road, before the county had a name. Our house is old. I want you to understand how old before I tell you the rest, because the age of it is the whole of the thing. It is called the long house in the valley, plain as that, because it is long and low and made of the gray valley stone, and no one living remembers it being built, and no record in the low town goes back far enough to say who laid it. The walls are as thick as a man is broad. The roof beams are black timber gone hard as iron, and there are marks cut into them that my grandfather said were only decoration, and his grandfather said the same, and I believed it too, for near 70 years. At the heart of the house is the hearth. It is not like other hearths. I have been in a good many houses in my life, and I have never seen its like. The hearthstone is a single slab of black stone, wide as a cart and near as long, and it is not the gray stone of the valley nor any stone the masons in the low town could name. It is smooth, and it is warm to the hand even at the far edge where no fire ever touches, and it is old past the reckoning of the house that grew up around it. My father used to say the house was built to keep the stone company, and not the other way round, and he said it the way a man says a thing he half believes and would rather not. The fireplace above it is a great arch of the same black stone, and set into the back of the arch at the level of a standing man's chest there is a mark, a circle, and within the circle lines that fold back on themselves the way a leaf's veins do or the frost does on a window, and at the center of it a small hollow the size of a closed fist. My father called it the eye. He never said why. He only said when I was a boy and reaching for it, leave the eye be, Aldies. You feed the fire, you don't touch the eye. And I left it be. The way you leave be a great many things your father tells you to, without ever knowing the reason and without ever needing one. The fire in that hearth had never gone out, not once, not in my life and not in my father's, and by everything he told me, not in any life the family had memory of. When I was a young man, full of myself and short of sense that seemed to me a foolish sort of pride, and I said so. I said a fire is only a fire. My father was old by then, and he did not argue with me. He only looked at the coals a long while and said, a man can be right about a thing and still be a fool. I did not know what he meant. I know now. I should tell you about the ones who came for it, because that is the part you would not guess. 3 times in my life, men came up the valley to Cold Kettle for the hearthstone, and each time they went away empty, and each time it was the stone that sent them. The first I only heard of, being too young to remember. A man from a college in the city, a learned man who had read somewhere of a black stone in a high valley and came up with instruments and paper to study it. My father told the story rarely and never with any relish. The learned man set his instruments on the hearthstone and worked over it for 2 days, and the stone did nothing, gave nothing, told him nothing, and his instruments showed him a cold slab of rock and no more. On the 3rd day he grew impatient, my father said, the way clever men do when a thing will not open to them, and he pried at the eye with a steel tool to take a sliver of it away for his college. And the fire in the hearth, which had been low and banked, my father said, stood up, not flared. Stood up straight and tall and white, taller than a man, without a sound, and did not burn the learned man and did not touch him, only stood there between him and the eye like a thing standing guard, until he gathered his instruments with shaking hands and went down the valley and never came back. My father was a boy when it happened, and he watched it from the doorway, and he said the fire made no smoke and gave no heat that he could feel, And that was the thing that frightened the learned man worst of all. A fire that is only doing the work of a fire gives heat. This one was not doing the work of a fire. The second I saw myself, I was near 30. A dealer in old things came up, a smooth man in good boots, and he did not pry at anything. He was cleverer than the learned man. He sat by the hearth and admired it and talked, and after a while he offered my father money, a great deal of money, more than the farm made in 10 years for the black stone. And when my father said no, the way you say no to a thing that was never yours to sell, the dealer smiled and said everything has its price and named a larger sum, and reached out, friendly as you like, and laid his hand flat on the eye. To feel it. To make it his in the small way a man makes a thing his by touching it as though he owns it. I was standing right there. The eye did not glow and the fire did not rise. But the man went white and pulled his hand back as though he had laid it on ice, and he cradled it against his chest and would not speak, and after a moment he stood up and left without his hat. My father let him go. When he was gone, I asked what had happened, and my father said, "It doesn't like to be handled by a man who's reaching." That is the only time I ever heard him come close to saying what the hearthstone was, and he did not say it. He only said what it did not like, and there is a difference, and I have thought about that difference for 40 years. The third time it was me. I am not proud of it. I was a man grown, my father was in the ground, the farm was mine, and the winters were hard, and the low town paid nothing for what a high farm could grow. And I sat by that hearth one black night with the accounts not adding, and I looked at the eye, and I thought, whatever you are, you have never once helped this family that has kept you alive for 1,000 years. I thought, give me something, just once. I have fed you every day of my life as my father did and his father did, and you have given us nothing but a warm floor and a fire that will not die, and I am cold in my bones and poor in my pockets, and I have kept my end. Give me something. And I put my hand on the eye. I will not tell you the fire rose because it did not. I will tell you what happened, and you may make of it what you like. Nothing happened. The stone was warm under my hand, warm as it always was, and the eye did not glow and the fire did not stand up, and there was no cold and no rebuke. There was only the plain warm stone, patient as it had always been, and a feeling came over me that I have never had before or since and cannot rightly put in words. It was the feeling of a hand resting on your shoulder from behind when you are ashamed, not gripping, not shaking you, only there, only saying without words, I know you are cold and poor and tired. That was never what you were for. I took my hand away and I wept, an old man's dry weeping, a young man's really, for I was young then, and I banked the fire and I went to bed, and in the morning I fed it again, and I never reached for it again, not once in all the years after. Not because I was afraid, because I understood in some half of me that had no words that the reaching was the one thing that would break it, that the whole of the keeping was in the not reaching, in doing the plain daily thing and asking nothing back. I told you the hearthstone refused every hand. That is what I meant. It refused the learned man, and it refused the dealer, and it refused me when I came to it with a grasping hand and a bill to pay. It answered no scholar and no buyer and no tired man wanting his due. In all my long life I never saw it answer anyone. And then came the winter I am going to tell you about, and it answered me. And to understand why, you have to understand that I was not reaching that night. I had stopped reaching for it 40 years before. That night I was only feeding the fire, the way my line had always fed it, because the fire must not go out. That was all. That is the whole of the reason. And it turned out to be the only reason that ever mattered. The winter came early, and it came wrong. I have seen hard winters. Cold kettle makes them. But this one came down in the last week of the harvest, before the wood was in, before the low town had run its last carts up, and it did not come as weather comes, in fronts and breaks, with a fair day here and there to catch your breath. It came and it stayed and it deepened, like a tide that forgets to turn. The snow came to the eaves in the first month and to the upper windows in the second, and the road down the valley closed and did not open, and the wind came down cold kettle every night without fail, night on night on night, so that the whole valley was one long roar in the dark, and the timbers of the old house groaned and held. I was not alone in it, and I am glad of that now, though I was not glad of it then, for a mouth to feed in a starving winter is a hard thing. The Marden family had been burned out in the autumn, their roof and their store both, a chimney fire, and they had come to me for a week while they saw to their own, the way people do in the valley, and then the winter shut the road and the week became a season and they could not leave. Call Marden and his wife Byrne and their 2 children, a girl of 10 named Ada and a boy of 6 named Till, and old Granda Marden who could not walk and sat by my hearth all the day long in a chair, and watched the fire and said little. 7 of us then in the long house, and I was the 8th, an old man with a farm that could not feed 7 through a winter it had never been meant to face. We were careful. Byrne Marden was a careful woman and I was a careful man, and between us, we made the store last longer than it had any right to. But careful only stretches a thing so far, and by the deep of the winter, the part of the year that has no name because no one goes out in it, we were down to the last of the meal and the last of the salt meat, and worst of all, the last of the wood. I want you to sit with the wood because in cold kettle the wood is the life. The meal you can stretch. Hunger is slow, but the fire is fast. Let the fire go and the cold is in the house in an hour and a child is dead by morning. And we were out. The woodshed that should have held a winter's fuel held a week's because the winter had come before the wood was in, and we had burned the weeks, and then we had burned the things a man burns when the wood is gone. The fence rails, the gate, the old cart, the extra chairs, the ones no one sat in, and then the ones people did. A dresser that had been my mother's. The doors off the rooms we had shut up and did not use. You burn your house from the inside out in a winter like that, room by room, and you keep the family in the one warm room and you feed the fire. And through all of it, through every stick of the fence and the last leg of my mother's dresser, the great hearth burned low and steady and warm, and asked for its plain feeding, and I gave it. I had never in my life let that fire go below a working flame, and I did not mean to start now, winter or no winter. It seems a small madness, looking back, a man burning the doors off his house to keep an ancient stone company. But I did not think of it as madness, and I do not now. It was the one rule. You keep the fire. There is no winter cold enough to unmake the one rule. If there were, it would not be a rule. The night I am going to tell you about was the worst night of that winter, and I have come to think it was the worst night the valley had seen in 1,000 years, though there was no one to measure it against. The wind came down cold kettle that night with a sound I had never heard from it, a low sound under the roar, almost a word, and the cold that came with it was a cold that got into the stone of the house, into the thick old walls that had held out every winter, and the walls went cold to the touch on the inside for the first time in my life. When the walls of the longhouse go cold, you are in the last of it. And we were out of wood. We had burned it all, every stick and rail and stave, every door and chair and board down to the last, and I stood in the woodshed with a lantern near midnight, and there was nothing in it but bark dust and cold. Call Marden stood behind me, and neither of us said anything because there was nothing to say. In the house the fire was low, not out, but low, lower than I had ever let it go, a bed of coals and one small flame, and it wanted its feeding, and I had nothing to feed it. There is a chair by the hearth in the longhouse. It is the oldest thing in the house after the stone, older than the roof beams maybe, black wood worn smooth, and it has sat by that hearth as long as the hearth has been there, and in my whole life I had never seen it moved, and no one ever sat in it, not my father, not his father, no one. It was the fire's chair, if you like. It was where the keeper sat when there was a keeper to sit, though I did not have that word then. It was just the old chair by the fire, that no one used, that no one would have dreamed of burning, the way you would not dream of burning the altar. I came in from the empty woodshed, and I looked at the low coals, and I looked at that chair, and Byrne Marden looked at me and understood, and she said, quiet so the children would not hear, not that one, Aldi's. Not that one. It's yours, it's your family's. And I said it's wood and the fire needs wood and there is a 6-year-old boy under that blanket. And I took up the axe. I want to tell you that I hesitated, and I did. My father's voice was in me and his father's, all of them saying not the chair, saying it was the one thing that was not for burning. But under the voices there was the older thing, the oldest rule, the one they had all served and I served now. You keep the fire. The fire must not go out. And the chair was wood and the fire was dying, and a rule that will not bend to save a child is not a rule worth a man's keeping. So I broke my hesitation the way you break a stick over your knee cleanly, and I raised the axe. And I could not bring it down. It was not fear and it was not the voices. It was a plain thing, the plainest thing. I looked at that old black chair, worn smooth by hands that were dust 1,000 years, the keeper's chair, and I understood all at once, standing there with the axe up, that of all the things in the house it was the one thing I would not burn. Not because it was forbidden, because it was ours. Because it was the seat of the keeping, the place the fire had been tended from, and to burn it to feed the fire was to eat the thing you were saving to feed the thing you were saving it for. And I lowered the axe, and I set it down, and I did the thing a man does when he has come to the end of what he has and will not spend the last of it. I fed the fire myself. I do not mean I threw myself on it. I mean I sat down in the keeper's chair, the first man to sit in it in living memory, and I took the last small things a man has when the wood is gone, the meal basket, empty, wicker and dry, the wooden bowl that had been my father's, a bundle of old letters in a drawer, my whole small history of the family in a dead hand. The last of it, the very last, the things you keep when you have nothing left to keep. And one by one I fed them to the coals, and I sat there, and I banked what I could, and I put my hands out to the small warmth, and I made up my mind that I would sit that chair through the night and feed the fire with whatever came to my hand, and my hand would find something. And when it found nothing, my hand would find nothing, and the fire would burn as long as I could keep it. And that was the whole of what I could do. I did not pray. I am not a praying man. I only kept the fire the way my line had always kept it, with the last of what I had and nothing back, and I did not reach for the eye, and I did not ask it for anything. I had learned that lesson 40 years before. I only fed it and I sat with it, and I meant to sit with it to the end. That is when it woke. I have gone over that night 1,000 times, trying to find the moment it began, and I cannot. It was not a flash. There was no crack of thunder, no light that broke out all at once. It came the way the dawn comes, so slow you cannot say when the dark stopped, only that at some point you notice it is no longer dark. The warmth came first. I was sitting with my hands out to a bed of coals and the small heat of a wicker basket burning, and the warmth on my hands grew. That is all. It grew, past what the coals could give, past what any fire in that grate could give, a deep warmth like standing in the last of the summer sun, and it did not come from the flame. It came from the stone. From the black hearthstone under my feet and the black arch at my back, the warmth rising up out of the stone itself, out of the whole great slab of it. So that the cold that had got into the walls of the house began to go back out of them, and the timbers stopped their groaning, and the roar of the wind seemed to draw off and away, as though the house had put up a hand against it. I looked at the eye. The mark in the back of the arch, the circle and the folded lines in the fist-sized hollow at the center of it, was not glowing. I want to be exact, because it matters. It was not lit like a coal is lit, from a fire behind it. It was lit like a thing is lit that has its own light and has been holding it in a long, long time. A soft light, the gold of banked embers, the gold of a lamp seen through a shut door, welling up out of the folded lines and running along them, out from the center and along every fold. And where the light ran, the black stone was not black anymore, but the deep red of iron in a forge, and warm and alive. And it did not stop at the eye. It ran out of the eye and along the arch, along lines in the stone I had never seen, that must always have been there under the black cut fine as hair, and the whole great arch of the hearth came up in that soft ember gold, every fold and turn of it, a pattern more intricate than any frost. And I sat in the keeper's chair and watched a thing I had lived my whole life against become, in the space of a slow breath, the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. And it ran out of the arch and into the walls. The marks on the roof beams, the ones my grandfather said were decoration, and his grandfather and all of us that we had believed were only some old builder's fancy. They woke. All down the black beams the marks came up in that same warm gold, and I saw, as a man sees a word he has looked at all his life and never read, that they were not decoration and had never been. They were of a piece with the eye. They were the same lines, the same folded hand, running out from the hearth along every beam and down into the gray stone of the walls where more of them woke, so that the whole longhouse, the whole ancient low stone house that had stood in cold kettle since before the county had a name, came up around me in a soft gold light like the inside of a lamp, warm, alive, and old, past any reckoning. And I understood for the first time in 70 years that the house had not been built to keep the stone company. The house was the stone, the whole of it. The hearth was only the heart. The house was the body grown up around the heart, and the family had lived inside a sleeping thing for 1,000 years and fed its heart every day and never known. I heard Bern Marden make a sound behind me. They were all awake now, all of them, roused by the light and the warmth, standing in the doorway of the warm room in their blankets, the mother and the father and the 2 children, and old Granda Marden had got up out of his chair that he could not get out of and was standing on his own, his face turned up to the gold light running in the beams, and there were tears on it. And the little ones, the girl and the boy, were not afraid. That is the thing I remember. They were not afraid at all. Their faces were turned up to the light and their mouths were open and their eyes were wide, and it was wonder, pure wonder, the wonder a child has that a grown man loses and would give anything to have back. And the boy, the 6-year-old, till whispered, "It's awake," the way a child says a plain, true thing, and none of us could say a word against it because it was. And then the fire in the hearth stood up. I had heard of it standing up from my father from the story of the learned man. I had never seen it. Now I did. The low coals in the small burning basket, and up out of them rose a flame, straight and tall and white, taller than a man, taller than 2, up into the great arch and filling it, and it made no smoke, and it gave no heat that scorched, only the deep warm gold light of it, and it did not roar. It was silent. A silent white flame standing in the hearth, and in it I will tell you what I saw, and you may believe me or not. In it there were shapes, not faces. I would not lie to you and say I saw faces, but depths. The flame had depths in it, the way a clear sky at night has depths, further and further back, and looking into it was like looking up out of a well at the stars, and I understood that I was not looking at a fire at all. I was looking at something very far away, that had been very far away for a very long time, and had at last come near enough to speak. And it spoke. It did not speak with a voice, or not with a voice that the ears take. It spoke the way the warmth had come up out of the stone, into the room, into the chest, so that we all heard it at once and each of us heard it, the children and the old man and the mother and father and me, every one in the plain speech of the valley, though I do not think it was any speech at all. And what it said, the first thing it said, after a silence 1,000 years long, was not a command and not a wonder and not a word of power. It said, "The hearth remembers you, keeper." That was all. 4 words and a name that was not my name and was, that I had never been given and had held my whole life without knowing it. Keeper. And I sat in the keeper's chair with the last of my family's letters burning to ash under a flame the size of a returning star, and I was an old man and I wept, the way I had wept 40 years before with my hand on the eye, and this time I understood what I was weeping for. I want to tell you what it told us that night, because it told us a good deal. In that way it had of speaking straight into the chest, and because it is the whole of why I have told you the rest. It was very old, that I had known, though not how old. It was older than the valley and older than the county and older than the low town and older, it let me understand, than the whole reckoning of men, for it had been made and set in the earth of cold kettle in a time before there were men in the valley to keep it, before there were men at all in that part of the world. It had been made by others. It did not show me their faces, and it did not give me their name, and I do not think the name would have fit in my head if it had. But it let me understand this much, that long ago, further back than the mind can walk, there had been others who went out across the great dark between the stars, and they had carried with them the oldest thing they had, which was fire, not the fire of a grate, but the true fire, the first fire, the seed of light itself, banked and carried in vessels of black stone, one to each world they came to be the heart of that world and the keeping of it. Banked stars, it let me understand them to be. Hearts of light, set sleeping in the cold stone of young worlds, to wake when the world was ready and warm it from within. And they had set one in cold kettle. In the cold heart of a cold valley on a young cold world, they had set a banked star in a slab of black stone, and grown a house of stone around it to hold it and hide it, and then they had gone on, out into the dark, the way you set a lamp in a window and go on into the night. But here is the thing it told us that I have carried every day since, and that I will carry to the grave, and that I have told you all the rest so that I could tell you this. It let me understand that it was not the only one, that there had been many, one to each world, banked stars in stone hearts across the whole great dark, set sleeping and set trusted, and that most of them were dead. Dead, gone cold, and not because their worlds had failed, and not because the cold of the dark had beaten them. They had died because they had been guarded, because on world after world, when men or things like men rose up and found the black stone with the banked star sleeping in it, they had done the sensible thing, the clever thing, the thing the learned man and the dealer and my own young grasping self had wanted to do. They had prized it out and studied it and locked it in a fortress and set a guard on it and made it a treasure and a secret and a power. They had reached for it. And the banked star, which is not a treasure and not a power and not a thing that answers a reaching hand, had gone cold in their vaults, waiting for a keeping that never came, because a thing set to be a hearth cannot live as a jewel in a case. It was made to be kept, fed, tended, sat within the cold, given the plain daily thing and asked nothing back. And on world after world across the whole dark, the clever and the grasping had taken the hearths for treasures and let the fires die, and the black stones had gone cold in guarded vaults, one after another, out and out across the stars, going dark like lamps in windows one by one, until cold kettle. Because in cold kettle it let me understand, the banked star had not been found by the clever, it had been found by the plain. By a family of farmers in a cold high valley, so long ago that the finding was forgotten, who had come upon a slab of black stone that stayed warm, and had done with it the one thing that keeps a hearth alive, and that no scholar or king or dealer would ever think to do. They had built their house around it and lived by it and fed its fire every day, not because they knew what it was, they never knew, not one of them, not in all the long line, but because it was warm and the valley was cold, and a family keeps its fire. They had kept it out of no grand reason, out of the plainest reason there is. Out of cold and habit, and the one rule handed down hand to hand for 1,000 years. You keep the fire, you don't let it go out, and that plain, stubborn, unglorious keeping, that daily feeding by people who never once asked the fire for anything, was the only kind of keeping the banked star could live on. And so it had lived. On a young cold world, in a forgotten valley, in the hands of farmers who never knew, the last of them, the very last banked star still burning in all the great dark, had been kept alive by the one thing the whole clever grasping cosmos could not manage, a family that simply fed the fire and asked nothing back. That is the thing, that is the whole of it. When I say it plain it does not sound like much, but I have sat with it every night since in the keeper's chair, and it does not get smaller. The wise had reached for the light and killed it. The plain had kept it and never known. And humanity, us, We, this stubborn cold country line of us, we had done the one thing that mattered in all the dark, and we had done it without knowing, without reward, without so much as a name for it, for 1,000 years, because it was cold and you keep your fire. If there is a thing about us worth the telling to the stars, I think it is that. Not our cleverness. Our cleverness would have killed it, same as everyone's. It is that we can keep a thing faithfully for 1,000 years for no reason grander than that it is ours, and it is cold, and you do not let the fire go out. It named me keeper because I had kept it, not because of my blood, though the blood ran back through all the keepers before me. Because on the worst night of the worst winter, out of wood and out of everything, an old man had sat down in the keeper's chair and fed the fire with the last things he owned, and had not reached for the eye, had asked it for nothing, had only kept it to the end because it must not go out. That was the recognition. That was the whole of the test, if it was a test, and I do not think it was a test. I think it was only the thing itself at last, seeing that it was still being done. The keeping, done plainly one more time by one more tired man who wanted nothing from it but to keep it, and the hearth remembered. I asked it not aloud, but it heard. I asked it what I was to do now. Now that I knew, now that I was named. I think I was afraid, an old man's fear, that being named a keeper of a bank star meant I was to become something, to leave off being a farmer and take up some great burden, to go out into the dark, to be more than I was. And the warmth in the stone and the depths in the flame gave me to understand a thing that I have been grateful for every day since. It let me understand that there was nothing more to do, that I had been doing the whole of it my whole life, that the keeping was not a burden to be taken up now, but the plain daily thing I had always done and was to go on doing. Feed the fire. Do not let it go out. Sit with it in the cold. Ask it nothing. The very same. That the being named had changed nothing about what I was to do and everything about what I was, and that this plain going on, this daily unglorious keeping, was not the price of the sovereignty. It was the sovereignty. It had been all along. The keeping was the crown, and I had worn it 70 years and never known, the way I had held the name keeper and never known, the way the whole line had kept a star and never known, and the not knowing had never mattered at all, because the keeping does not need to be known to be true. It only needs to be done. And then near the end of that long gold night, it did one thing more, and I will tell you, and then I am near done. The flame in the hearth, the tall silent white flame with the depths in it, drew up its light, and it sent it out. Not into the room. Up through the beams where the marks ran gold, up through the roof, out through the stone, out into the black roaring night over cold kettle, and I could not have seen it go, but somehow I knew it went. A light going up out of that low old stone house into the dark like a lamp lit in a window at last, after 1,000 years of banked and hidden burning. A hearth unhidden for one night, shining, and it went up and out into the great dark, and I understood that it was a light that could be seen very far away, that it was the first such light to shine out of that dark in a long, long time. That somewhere, out past all the cold vaults where the other stars had died guarded, out past the dead lamps in dead windows across the whole reach of it, there might be something still awake, some kin of the fire, some old keeper of its own, that had watched the lights go out one by one for age on age and had thought itself the last, and that would look up this night and see a light it had thought long dead come back on in the dark. I do not know if anything saw it. I have no way to know. The flame did not tell me, and I did not ask because I have learned not to reach. But I have thought many nights since of what it would be to be the last of a thing, watching the last lights go out and then to see one come back on. And I hope something saw it. I hope it, the way you hope a lamp you leave in a window will be seen by someone lost on the road. That is all the keeping is in the end. A lamp in a window. You do not do it because you know who is on the road. You do it because the road is dark and the night is cold and you have a light, and you do not let it go out. The light drew back down before the dawn. The gold went out of the beams and out of the walls, slow as it had come, and the marks went quiet and looked again like an old builder's fancy, and the great flame sank back down into a bed of coals in one small ordinary flame, and the eye dimmed to a warm, dark stone with a mark on it that a man would call decoration. And the longhouse was only the longhouse again, low and old and stone. But it was warm. The cold that had got into the walls had gone out of them and did not come back, not that night and not the rest of that winter. And the wind came down cold kettle still, but it did not touch us. And in the morning the road began to open, and by the turn of the season the Mardens went home to build again. And the worst winter in 1,000 years let go of the valley and became a story that the low town tells and does not believe. The Mardens do not speak of it, not because they were told not to, because there are no words that hold it, and they know it and they let it be, the way you let a great many things be. But sometimes when I go down to the low town, old Granda Marden, who walks now and did not walk before, catches my eye across the room and gives me a small nod, and I nod back, and that is all, and it is enough. The children will carry it their whole lives. I have seen the way the girl, Ada, looks at a fire. She will keep her own well wherever she goes. Some keepings are caught and not taught. She caught it that night. I am very old now, older than my father lived to be. The farm is small and the winters are hard, and the low town still pays nothing for what a high farm grows, and none of that has changed, and I do not expect it to. I have no son to hand it to and no daughter, my wife being long in the ground and no children come of us, and that is a grief, but it is an old one and worn smooth. I have wondered some nights who will keep it when I am gone. It troubles me less than you would think. The hearth kept itself alive for 1,000 years by being kept by people who did not know what they kept. It does not need a bloodline. It needs a keeper. And there are always, in a cold valley, people who will keep a fire because the fire must not go out. I have made arrangements. There is a young family down the valley, good people, plain people, who will have the longhouse when I am gone, and I have told them the one thing, the only thing, the thing my father told me with his hands on mine on the hearthstone when I was small enough to stand on it. You keep the fire. You feed it every day. You bank it at night so a coal lives till morning. You do not let it go out. And you leave the eye be. You feed the fire, you don't touch the eye. They think it is an old man's whim, a condition on a gift, a bit of valley superstition to be humored. That is exactly right. That is exactly how it should be. That is how it has always been kept and how it must go on being kept, by people who do the plain thing for the plain reason and do not know and do not need to know. One day, maybe, in their line or the line after, on some worst night of some worst winter, an old one of them will sit down in the keeper's chair with the last of everything and feed the fire and ask it nothing, and the hearth will remember, and they will learn what I learned. And until then they will only keep a fire in a cold house, faithfully, for no grand reason, and that will be enough. That is the whole of it. That was always the whole of it. I sit in the keeper's chair now most nights, which no one sat in for 1,000 years, and which I sit in freely, having earned it, though earning was never the point. I feed the fire. I do not reach for the eye. I put out my old hands to the warm stone and the small flame, and I think about the light going up out of the dark that one night, the lamp in the window, the light that came back on, and I wonder if it was seen, and I hope it was. And then I bank the fire so a coal will live till morning, and I go to my bed, and in the morning I get up and I feed it again. That is the story. I have kept a fire my whole life. I know now what I was keeping. It has not changed a single thing about the keeping. You feed the fire. You do not let it go out. It is the plainest thing in the world, and it turns out it was the whole of the world, and no one told us, and we did it anyway for 1,000 years, because it was ours and it was cold. The hearth remembers. That is enough, keep the fire.